Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session on impact tracking. We're thrilled that you're here. We're going to just give it another second for folks to trickle in, and we'll get started. One moment. Thanks everyone for being here. I hope it's been a productive day at the summit so far, and you've enjoyed the presentations. Eager to get your feedback. Awesome. So we'll get started and jump right in. I'm Yossi Lichterman from the Lenfest Institute. I'm thrilled to be here with Anita Lee from the Green Line in Toronto, Lindsay Green-Barber from Impact Architects, and Alex Salins from the Solutions Journalism Network. And we're going to be talking about impact tracking and asking questions and hopefully sharing some strategies for how to best track impact to support fundraising. And so we're going to give us short presentations, and then we'll open it up for questions. So please feel free to jump in the chat or use the Q&A function to submit any questions, and we'll get started. I'm going to share a screen and we'll get going. Technical difficulties. Thanks for your patience. Trying to do too many windows open. Awesome. And so, Lindsay, I will turn it over to you, and you should be able to control the slides.
Thanks so much, Yossi. Excited to be here today to share a little bit about impact, and then specifically some about our impact tracker. So I'm Lindsay. I'm the founder and principal at Impact Architects, a consulting firm, and we do strategy and research with media companies and with foundations that support journalism and media more broadly. We've been around for about 6 years and have had the pleasure of working with many of the folks on this panel and some of y'all that I see in the attendee room already. And so I'm going to just spend a couple of minutes talking kind of big picture about how we approach thinking about impact in journalism and media as kind of a table setting for this panel conversation today. And then I'm really excited to share our updated impact tracker that is a free kind of open source Google-based tool that is available to anyone who is interested in thinking about how to track and measure the impact of their journalism work. Excellent. So our impact model, big picture, we define impact as any kind of change that is a direct result of an intervention. So that could be text reporting, an in-person community engagement event, documentary film, any kind of an intervention where we can then observe a change. And my training is as a social scientist. And so my kind of orientation towards all of this is if something changes, it's observable and it means it's measurable. And so when we say measurement, we sometimes are talking about numbers and quantitative data, but more often we're often talking about qualitative measurement. So how can we use things like tracking this qualitative data, content analysis, other approaches to be able to measure things that are not quantifiable. We've worked with dozens, if not hundreds of newsrooms over the past 10 years or so. And when we sit down and hear from newsrooms, you know, what does success mean to you? What does impact mean to you? It almost always boils down to 3 large categories. And you can come up with different names for this or different words. But in general, newsrooms and journalists are often thinking about the impact on individuals. So the individuals in the audience who are reading content or who are listening to a story, we're thinking about how they might be changing their opinion, or they might be there might be increased empathy, how they might be having increased knowledge about an issue. Maybe they're even going to behave differently. These are all things that are happening inside of an individual, and we don't necessarily know from our digital analytics. We can make some guesses, but we don't necessarily know. The other thing we hear about often from newsrooms and news organizations is the kind of impact that we have on institutions. And so this is especially true of accountability reporting. And I started at the Center for Investigative Reporting. And so this is something that was really important there. How is content actually holding power to account? What kinds of policies are being changed or new policies are being made? are folks getting fired? Are loopholes being closed? But all of these institutional changes that we can observe that are a direct result of journalism often. And then the third one is kind of like a funny, like mushy category that we hear more and more folks talking about, but it's really hard to measure. And that is this community or network impact. And so how is content or how is reporting and often engagement activities and other things actually helping to create community or strengthen pre-existing communities? And again, how do we actually know when that's happening? How can we observe it? And how can we measure it? And then the last category that we add on, this is particularly important for nonprofits where content syndication and redistribution is really important, but that is this media amplification. So if you're breaking a story or reporting on an issue, how is that coverage then picked up by other media, and how are you setting a public agenda that's then reaching a broader audience? And one thing about this model that I really want to underscore, we think is really important, is that this is not hierarchical. So you'll notice it's not just that content goes out to individuals and they change their opinions on something and then they vote differently and there's an institutional change. Sometimes it happens that way. Sometimes the change comes straight to accountability and there's a change at an institutional level and there's some sort of a trickle down effect. The idea here is really that this is an ecosystem of change. And so the interaction of these different categories of impact is going to look different. And our goal would be to, if we are tracking and measuring things over time, can we start to observe what are similar patterns? If we're reporting on the environment, do we notice that the change pattern looks similar? And if we're reporting on, I don't know, let's say education, does the change pattern look different? And so if we start to get better information about what these processes look like, that can in turn help to inform editorial decision making, audience engagement work. And of course, we know that we're at the News Philanthropy Summit. We know that information about impact is critically important for communicating our value to all different stakeholders in the context of our audiences, large individual donors, and institutional organizations that support this work. The challenge, though, is that so if you're in a newsroom, how do you actually go about setting up a system where you can track and measure impact? And better yet, how can you create a culture of impact in your organization? So this is not just an add-on at the end for grant reporting purposes, but in fact is central and kind of core to the DNA of the organization. And the way that we suggest you kind of approach it is first by defining impact. So asking yourself and your organizations, what does success mean for your work? What changes are you trying to see, or what changes do you see? So this might be more observational. And then you can start to develop some of those indicators about how do you actually know if change is happening? What indicators do you already have access to that you can use? And where are there gaps? Where are there things that might be happening, again, offline, kind of out in the real world that aren't being captured by many of the analytics that you have access to? And that's where the final step comes in, that is the tracking impact. So trying to develop systems to help you track impact over time, to be able to create that culture of impact internally, which means setting up workflows that reflect these systems for tracking and measuring impact over time, determining if this is a process that's going to be centralized in one or two people, or if it's going to be distributed across teams. And so really being intentional and thoughtful about how it's then integrated into your newsroom practices and workflows. And so the Impact Tracker platform that we've developed, and this was originally developed when I worked at the Center for Investigative Reporting and was on a custom platform. And about 2 years ago, when we got the platform from CIR, said, we're not really in the business of product management. And so we took it on and did user testing and realized this really needs to be something that's quite editable, changeable, malleable, because every newsroom, while there's a lot of similarities, there are definitely unique things about the approach to impact. And so there are great examples of similar platforms that have been built on Airtable out there. Resolve Philly has one that's available. We've seen people build this in similar systems into their Salesforce platforms, but we put out this Google-based platform. And it is a digital platform to help news organizations, funders, and other stakeholders understand the impact of journalism by defining, measuring, and tracking real-world change. What that means is there are essentially on the next slide here. There are 3 parts to this platform. The first is a Google form. So this is where your team, so reporters, editors, people in development, people across the organization can really quickly fill out a form. It takes about less than a minute to document any of these kind of out in the real world changes that are happening. These go into a database, which is essentially a Google Sheet that only 1 or 2 people ever need to look at, because the data are all visualized and available through a Google Looker Studio dashboard. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the dashboard view, where it's aggregating all of the examples of impact by category. So if it's institutional, individual, or network change, it's showing change over time. It gives you some interesting different views, and you can do all kinds of sorting and filtering. So again, you can compare, what's the impact of our climate reporting compared with the impact of our education reporting, or any other kind of question you might want to ask of these data. And it's downloadable. So once you're working in the dashboard, you're able to take subsets of this information. So you're working on, let's say, like an awards application for your criminal justice reporting. You can set filters to get those data downloaded directly. Or if you're working on a proposal for environmental coverage, you'd be able to pull those data as well. And put it all together and send it off to whomever it is you're wanting to share that information with. So the goal really is to, again, create this workflow that is centralizing information, making it more accessible and useful for organizational strategy, as well as for communicating this value across different stakeholders. So thank you, Yossi, for sending, so I think I see you sharing the link in the chat if anyone wants more information. And these slides will be shared too, and there's a link on there. But we're really excited about this and happy to have conversations with anyone who might find it useful.
Amazing. Thank you, Lindsay. And over to you, Alec.
Thank you, Yossi, and it's a real pleasure to be alongside my co-panelists here to talk about impact and impact tracking. And Lindsay, thank you for setting the kind of foundations for the discussion today. So what I want to talk about is the work of the Solutions Journalism Network, an organization that disseminates the practice of solutions journalism, which is defined as a rigorous and evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. We work with journalists, news organizations, educational institutions, J schools to disseminate the practice of solutions journalism. And it's become pretty clear to us that being able to demonstrate the impact of solutions journalism was really vital to our work, and also vital for newsrooms and other media actors to be able to do in order to justify the pursuit of this editorial approach. So what I'm going to be talking about today is how we've built an organization-wide strategy and culture that around impact tracking that is designed to help sustain the solutions journalism movement that we're seeing flourish and take off. So first off, what's our purpose? Well, we're really intended, and we've shaped ourselves and optimized ourselves to produce quality information about the impact of solutions journalism, and with a specific focus on one, how solutions journalism impact society, and then second, how does that manifest within the industry? And so the main stakeholders that we produce this type of information for are the following. First off, the newsrooms, and I should say by extension, this applies to individual journalists in journalism schools. It's really important to have impact information that we can share internally to our organization with our colleagues, such that they can use this information in the trainings that they do with the range of stakeholders that we serve. We also are interested in being able to share that information with researchers who are studying the impact of solutions journalism and the various different ways in which that manifests. And then last but not least, it's really important to us as an organization, SJN, a journalism support organization that is mostly funded by philanthropy, to be able to demonstrate the value of the work that we're doing. And so funders are also a major stakeholders. And by extension, newsrooms that we work with also have their own funders to be able to account for the work that they're doing too. And so we work with newsrooms to help them better do that. On the right-hand side, this is just a a screenshot of our website. If you're interested in going to it, solutionsjournalism.org, there is an impact tab at the top of the menu there, and you'll be able to go onto our page and have a bit of a browse for the various different resources and types of impact information that we're currently serving up to members of the public who are interested in landing on that page and finding out more about our work. So we recently developed an impact and evaluation strategy that was designed to disseminate the practice of evaluating our work and just kind of tracking impact. And it's something that was done over the course of several months. And it's really designed to help structure a culture of impact tracking across the organization. And we focused on various different aspects in this strategy that I wanted to share with you to give you a bit of an idea of something that you could be replicating in your own organization. So first off, what we tried to do is align the objectives and the capacity of several different teams within our organization. Those are the development team that speak to the funders, the people who are doing the programmatic work. So those are folks who interact directly with a myriad of media actors that we train and work to disseminate solution journalism with. And then lastly, and really not least, it's important for our operations teams, our systems teams, to have a real understanding of what it is that we're trying to do when we talk about impact tracking, such that we can build out an infrastructure that is suitable, that can support workflows to be able to generate that information for us. So what we started doing is, and this is work that has been done and been developed for many years, in fact, and it very much comes off the awesome work that Lindsay has done, is develop a taxonomy. And Lindsay referred to this, but it's really important to understand what kind of impact are we looking for? What do we know in terms of what impact has been had when it comes to solutions journalism? And from there, to define and set a clear framework and taxonomy for the different types of impact that we will be measuring. We call them impact categories, and there are a number of them, and I'll describe them in a minute. But subsequently, it's important to develop these workflows that help us to be able to identify where the information is and to surface that information and get it into our system, get our staff team to be knowledgeable about that impact, and for us to be able to include that in the workflow that will help us to process the impact information that we're given. And I'll describe what that looks like in a minute as well. But crucially as well, we don't want to do that work on our own. We are the Solutions Journalism Network, so we really have a network mindset around the work that we do. And so it's been really key to meet with network partners where they're at, understand what they're doing when it comes to impact tracking, and also how we can equip them to do better impact tracking. So we've developed some resources and have built cohorts to discuss and share their know-how and experiences and insights about how to do impact tracking. What are the best practices that can be shared across the network in order to do that? So we really see ourselves as a conduit for helping network partners to do that in a more effective way. And then lastly, and I'll touch on this as well, we have a range of different distribution strategies and tools and platforms that we use to be able to share the impact information that we produce. So this is a very boiled down version of the really complex framework that Lindsay described earlier about how to think about impact in the ways it manifests. So we boiled that down, as I've already mentioned, two overall sections. One is societal impact, and I want to share with you what those categories are. So first off, we're looking at accountability or institutional change. And that's when solution journalism coverage contributes to change in policy, a law, or practice, mostly within institutions. Cross-pollination is kind of akin to that, but slightly different. And that's when solutions journalism is a vector in helping communities learn about something that is happening elsewhere, and that it sparks a significant discussion or action to replicate what has been done elsewhere in terms of response to a social problem in the local community that the publication, the news organization is serving. Lastly, we're also tracking engagement and trust, and that's when solutions coverage leads to increased engagement and trust between a community and in a newsroom. And there are myriad of ways of doing that. And we actually have an impact tracking guide that just came out that is mostly focused on that. What is the impact on audiences that we can evaluate, and how can we optimize ourselves to do that? And this is particularly useful for news organizations. And I can share the resource that we just produced with an organization based in the UK called Fathom in the chat. And I invite you all to take a look at it. Another impact category, type of impact that we look at, is public discourse and civic engagement. And that's when solutions coverage leads to a change in those two aspects, and particularly leads a community to really take action around specific issues that they've learned about and learn about how to remedy through the solutions approach. So the second umbrella category is the impact that solution journalism has on the newsrooms and industry. So we look at revenue. I'm now the impact manager at the Solutions Journalism Network, but I used to run our revenue project, effectively testing the hypothesis that solutions journalism could be leveraged to help newsrooms generate more revenue across revenue streams. And so I track that pretty closely. And there is indeed a correlation there. It's something that always needs to be studied, and every news organization will have its own way of being able to make that connection. But that's one thing that we track. So that's when news organizations receive income from funders, readers, or businesses related to solutions journalism practices. And there's a myriad of ways to understand that. We also look at awards in the industry. We're seeing that solution journalism is becoming more prominent and something that is practiced increasingly across the industry. And so we're interested in tracking, well, what kind of a change is that making in terms of the recognition that this approach is having. So particularly in this case, rather than looking at smaller awards, we're particularly looking at more prestigious prizes that are given out at a state or national level. So we have a threshold for the type of impact quality that we're looking for. We're also tracking practice change, new solutions journalism initiative. That is how newsrooms are adopting this editorial practice. What are the changes that they're making internally in terms of their workflows, in terms of their output, in terms of the types of format that they're using to tell solutions-oriented stories? We're interested in understanding that better in order to help us shape the training materials that we produce, the training workshops that we organize, in order to then distribute that across the industry and disseminate that across our network. And then lastly, we're also interested in the phenomena of network spread. And that's when the practice of solutions reporting is taken on and taught through a range of different vectors in a way that is carried out by people who we see in our network, but that the Solution Journalism Network is not directly connected to, or that we're not involved in creating. So we're interested in seeing our network partners take the lead in organizing solutions journalism projects and disseminating the practice in and of themselves without our direct involvement. So those are the taxonomies that's the taxonomy that we've developed over the years and what we track specifically. So what does that look like in terms of workflow? Well, first of all, we educate our staff about what types of impact we are interested in. So they learn taxonomy, and this is something that we're constantly needing to do more of. There is a need to reiterate that. It's not something that is a one and done. There really needs to be culture building around that. We need to socialize this understanding, and we need to constantly do work on this. But this is like the workflow working at its most optimized way. Is staff looks for example of impact, and additionally we invite newsrooms in our network, particularly the ones that are involved in grant-funded projects with us, to look at what kind of impact their solution journalism is having. Then the key gateway for gathering that information is our impact tracker. We developed our own, similar, and again derived from the one that Lindsay developed at CIR, and that is a form that was created that sends information to our Salesforce database. I, as the impact manager, will review every submission that is made through our impact tracker, and then I will assess whether the impact is strong enough. If the impact isn't strong enough, that information will stay in Salesforce database, And we'll look at the metadata that we're still collecting there in order to generate some information that could be useful to our organization. But if we find that the impact has met a particular threshold that adheres to the definitions that we have in the categories that we've set out, that is something that we'll then investigate a little further, and we'll try to flesh out the information in order to be able to tell a story of that impact in a way that is really comprehensive and that can be shared publicly. So I will work as the impact manager with staff and journalists that have seen impact, have reported impact to us, to write up what we call an impact anecdote. And we try and keep those short and brief. 100 words is those kinds of impact anecdotes that you can see on our impact page on the website. And the last piece of information here in a box that is orange red here is what is our impact vetting production checklist. There are a range of different steps that we go through in order to ascertain and develop ascertain the quality of solutions journalism and develop them into a piece of reporting effectively that we're happy to share with funders and a range of different stakeholders and with the public more generally. And again, you'll have the slides so you can dig into that a little bit more deeply on your own subsequently. Here's a snapshot, a screenshot of our impact tracker that we developed. It's been important to us to make it clear why tracking impact is important. So we have in our header section a description of why that is. And then to the right-hand side, this is like a partial snapshot of the whole form, but you can see that we start breaking down information about that we're collecting related to impact, such that we can then follow up with the people who are submitting that information. On average, this form takes 5 minutes to fill out, and it's again like our gateway to gather information in one centralized database. And then I wanted to just share with you a few examples of what we've produced at the Solutions Journalism Network based on our learning around impact tracking, but also in terms of how we share resources. So to the left-hand side, bottom left there, you can see our annual report, which is on our website. Many of you all are producing annual reports to demonstrate and tell a story of change related to the work that you're doing or account for the work that you're doing for a range of different stakeholders. Impact is a crucial part of an annual report. So take a look at that if you're interested. We've got newsletters. The Response is our flagship newsletters where we share examples of solution stories, and we've started highlighting impact anecdotes and impact stories related to those stories. And then to the right-hand side here, you can see a range of different resources that we produce, guides, notably the impact tracking guide, which I just mentioned, and then also how to measure impact through surveys. And then lastly, to the bottom right, strategies for tracking impact that has been developed by our collaboratives team, trying to track the impact that collaboratives have together when they produce solutions journalism-oriented content. And then the PDF there that you can see to the left, to the bottom left of the square of 4 resources on the right-hand side, that is an example of our annual report. Where we basically break down per category all the different types of impact anecdotes. And that is something that you can find on our impact page. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Mariko.
This is Yossi again. Amazing. Thank you, Alec. And just want to welcome Mariko Chang, who is from Honolulu Civil Beat, and will speak next and tell us a bit about how a newsroom is thinking about tracking impact and putting some of these concepts into practice.
Hi, so sorry. My video. Oh, there. Oh, so sorry.
You are so fine, Mariko. Maybe it makes sense we can skip ahead to Anita and come back so we can figure out your video, if that sounds good.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Or otherwise, I can just do the audio.
Just audio is fine then. So
okay.
Let's do that, and I'll work on getting your video on.
Thank you. It's probably on my side. But anyways, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here. My name is Mariko Chang. I am here representing Honolulu Civil Beat. We're a small but growing nonprofit newsroom in Honolulu, Hawaii, and we serve the entire state of Hawaii with public service accountability journalism with various beats, including climate change, health, criminal justice, education, for example. I do want to mention that we were founded in 2010 as a subscription-based model, but quickly transitioned in 2016 to a nonprofit to better align our revenue model with the mission mindset that Honolulu Civil Beat was founded on. And I thought I would describe our approach to impact using one of our strongest examples that we've been able to track over time. In particular, in 2018, we had a story that was published by our education reporter about the lack of girls' locker rooms in Hawaii's largest public high school and a number of public high schools throughout the state. She revealed these really stark realities of these aging facilities, as well as, the underlying lack of compliance with Title IX. So it was a really powerful story that just kind of got lost in a boardroom or in a kind of board discussion until our reporter kind of picked up on it. So we break down our impact using three main buckets: reach, engagement, and societal impact. Reach, we look at, the degree to which the content is reaching people, how many people are seeing it. And this breaks down really easily because we are all online. And that comes down to page views, unique visitors, and engaged time. With this particular story, we use a platform called Parsley to pull all of our numbers. And, I was looking back, and this is a little dated, but we had, thank you. We had 3,000 visitors, 3,500 page views, and 1,700 engaged minutes. And like I mentioned, this is something that we can download off of a platform that we use quite regularly called Parsley. And we've selected kind of these three main indicators because they don't necessarily stand alone. As an example, you wouldn't want to, just look at the low number of visitors, but high engagement time and see that kind of as disappointing. Because for us, we look at it as these maybe a small number of visitors are really spending a lot of time with an article and making it all the way to the end. The next thing we look at is engagement. And oh, sorry, did the slide go away?
Yeah, that was my fault. I will get it back.
Okay, the next thing we look at is engagement or reaction to the story, how much it's shared, what degree it prompts action and interaction. This is largely captured by social shares, which is also kind of a metric that we're able to download from Parsley. And in this case, we had 3,800 social interactions. But I also want to mention that when you think of engagement, it's pretty broad. And so you can grab comments is also kind of another metric to follow. And in this particular instance with this education story, we held a live in-person event with one of our partners, the ACLU of Hawaii. And I was just thinking back, and event attendance is also kind of a strong number worth sharing and worth keeping. And finally, again, another kind of broad bucket, but we're looking at societal change or reform, the qualitative side of the impact. And, you know, looking at whether the story has reached a national audience, was the basis for legislation, all the things that Alec has and Lindsay have both kind of touched upon. Did it spur individual action? We're even grabbing testimonials. With this story in particular, we're super really proud to share that, you know, based on that kind of breaking story, ACLU of Hawaii sent a demand letter to our Department of Education. They went on to file a class action lawsuit. The story was picked up by local as well as national media, including the New York Times really recently. And ultimately, there was a significant amount of state budget that was allocated to address the infrastructure inequities, particularly for the different facilities, and to kind of come into compliance with Title IX. So I just wanted to kind of touch on a couple of strong process things that Honolulu Civil Beat utilizes in our impact process. The one first being how we go about capturing the impact. This is something that we rely on the reporters and editors to kind of share with us, and we have not only through direct email, but have set up an impact@civilbeat.org, ways to easily kind of forward something. We try to make it obviously as easy as possible. We also have a WIN Slack channel, so it's coming to us from different directions. That's the image that you see on your screen. Because we understand that some people may or may not feel kind of comfortable kind of tooting their own horn. So we want to kind of encourage and give them as many ways to kind of give our team, that being the fundraising team, ways of kind of awareness. And I think Lindsay had mentioned this really quickly, but so all of the impact is fielded through our fundraising staff. And we have 2 individuals that are kind of in charge of kind of tracking and inputting it. And we've adopted the Impact Architecture's impact tracker. But it's, you know, it's really important to have kind of those dedicated people, if you of course have the resources. But that allows for some consistency in terms of how the impact is phrased, and how it's tagged, for example. And, you know, the challenge that we've noticed is that, of course, some reporters are kind of maybe better than others, or more aware. And of course, our reporting staff is very busy. But in order to combat that, we've held the first kind of internal impact workshop this past summer, all in an effort to kind of help build up that culture of impact internally. In the future, I think we'd love to host maybe even like a public submission form where readers, you know, can submit how stories have made an impact. Because we already know that, you know, even through our donations, that folks are finding the stories very powerful. And so we kind of love to formalize that process and have it be more of an exchange. And let's see. I can't advance to the next slide right now. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. My last point is just about communicating impact. So once, you know, it's, you can pull this data from Parsley, you can enter it into kind of the impact form, but once it kind of lives on those spreadsheets, how do you take that into a storytelling format? And especially for these different audiences, that other folks have already mentioned. For us, it's, you know, we're looking at reporting out to the board, out to foundation funders, out to our readers and potential members. We know that for a small shop, this is a lot of work. And so we try at least our best to kind of repurpose the information. For example, at Civil Beat, we know we have quarterly board deliverables, and impact usually lives on a couple of slides. So with knowing that we already have kind of that deadline, is how do we kind of repackage that? So on the side of your screen, it's just a little screenshot of how we've kind of expanded it a little bit and built it out into a membership email. What we've noticed is that these kinds of email appeals don't necessarily bring in revenue, but it's a really good, what we hope to be a good cultivation technique. You know, one just little anecdote is that, at least for our foundation funders, we know that one, for example, did renew their very large and generous grant because we were able to articulate the impact in a way that, you know, they found really meaningful. Yeah, and happy to kind of share more of what these kind of outputs look like if anyone has questions later on. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Mariko. And I will turn it over to Anita, who is up next.
Great, thank you, Yossi. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to try to blaze through this a bit quicker so everybody gets a chance for questions, because I know my co-panelists have been so fantastic, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions to ask. So once Yossi gets the slides up there, I'm going to kick things off. So my name is Anita Lee, and I'm the founder, editor-in-chief, and CEO of a hyperlocal independent news outlet called The Green Line. And here it is. And so I'm based in Toronto, Canada, and The Green Line is all about investigating the way we live to help young and other underserved Torontonians survive and thrive in a rapidly changing city. Essentially, we were founded really recently in April 2022. So we're still trying to figure out, we're testing and we're trying to figure out how to track impact. So over the course of my presentation, I'm going to describe a few approaches that we've taken so far, but I would love your feedback and to know what everyone here is doing in their respective newsrooms. So the core mission of The Green Line is to redefine Toronto through the way we live. And it's really connecting to this idea of media as a pillar of democracy, and this notion that every action that you take shapes not only who you are as an individual, it shapes your community, your city, your province, your country, your state, your country, et cetera. So we're really, that is kind of inherent into the way we measure impact. It's not just about people passively consuming the news. It's a lot more about how they're not only actively engaging the news, but how they're taking that information and therefore then actively engaging the communities around them. So this is the problem that we're trying to address. Obviously, especially the pandemic has really highlighted a lot of social inequities that have popped up, and in also that I've also seen in my own city of Toronto. And in particular, based on the research that I've conducted, Gen Zs and millennials are experiencing greater rates of depression and anxiety than other generations. So the idea is that the Green Line will help these folks navigate life in the city by investigating the way we live. The Green Line gets to the root of the issues that impact Torontonians the most. So we collaborate with the journalists and the creators from the communities we serve to report on local solutions. Shout out to Alec in solutions journalism that target the sources, not the symptoms of the biggest problems facing our city. So I want to talk through our model and then start to get a bit more specific about the metrics that we measure. So these are our target audiences. I won't go through them in inordinate detail, but the first two are our local audiences. They are action-oriented young urbanites. And then the second is underrepresented Torontonians. And those are people who live, work, and play in highly populated areas of Toronto, but who are underserved by existing media. And then culture vultures are our only non-local audience. So that's non-Torontonian audiences who we think are English speakers in urban centers around the world, like London, England, New York City, Vancouver, for example, Calgary, who are interested in Toronto's news, because Toronto is the biggest city in Canada. We also are increasingly a global city with a lot of soft power and interest in our cultural engagements. So this is one of the big things that we're trying to address. Like I said, a big part of the way we engage with our audience is through solutions journalism and kind of illuminating pathways forward where they can take action. And I'm going to skip through this data because I illustrated basically just the sentiments of Gen Zs and millennials and just how much they're struggling, especially in cities. including that of Toronto. So what I really want to focus on is our attention funnel and our action journey, which is our core parts of our model. And I'll explain some of the metrics that we measure within these frameworks. So the way we engage our audience is through this funnel approach. And at the top of the funnel, we basically we use comedy, opinion pieces, and behind the scenes content to kind of engage folks because it's really accessible and it's effectively low-hanging fruit. The second level, it's service journalism, which is basically how-to guides and explainers for navigating life in the city. We have a guide to co-housing, for example. We have a guide to climate action. And then originals are basically articles that you might find in your typical metropolitan daily, except they're tailored to two major platforms that we produce short form articles on, which is Instagram and TikTok. And then finally, we have in-depth solutions-focused journalism that report on existing solutions to systemic problems facing the city. So the whole notion is that, you know, when you encounter a new kind of like topic, the more you understand the topic, the deeper you want to dive. And that's basically our engagement strategy and funnel. So I'll give you some concrete examples of this. These are basically on the middle, you'll see a TikTok by our resident comedian, Danish Anwar. This is all coverage that we did for the most recent municipal election in Toronto, which happened in October. So this is obviously like a brief TikTok. It's meant to be comedic. It's meant to be fun. It's really short. It's like all of 10 seconds, 15 seconds. On the right-hand side are more of our engagement pieces, which really, they're basically community profiles or they're profiles of local businesses or local institutions. In this case, we actually asked the question, what's in my character? And we profiled the top 3 mayoral candidates through that lens. It was a different approach to engaging our audience on this topic because there was a lot of exhaustion when it came to electoral news because we had a lot of elections, both at the provincial and federal level in recent years. So we took a bit of a different approach. And then on the left-hand side are it's basically a guide that folks can bring to basically when they vote, when they hit the polls. And really it was an overview of basically the policy platforms of the 3 top mayoral candidates, as well as their track records. So one thing I want to highlight about these is that the guide on the left-hand side had about 430 shares and 129 saves. I really want to emphasize saves as a metric that we are paying quite a close attention to. And the reason is because while shares are obviously a standard engagement metric that many of us look to, we all know about performative sharing. Maybe we've even done it ourselves, like sharing something that we like quickly kind of put out on our Twitter without a ton of thought. And so for me, when I think about the way people make changes, meaningful changes in their life, they're often, you know, it's often things that you sit with that thought, you kind of work through it on your own. It's more of a private reconciliation rather than a public declaration. So if we're talking about really making meaningful impact and getting people to seeing if people actually find our journalism valuable, I find that when folks save a post, it means that they're more inclined to revisit it on their own time. It's not about performance and not about sharing. It's really and truly solely about the value the piece of content brings to their lives. I want to now talk through our action journey, which is also called an action funnel, and that's second part of our engagement. And there's another key metric that we measure in this framework. But basically the green line is known for our action journey model. And basically the way it works is in a given month, we tackle a systemic issue facing Toronto. One of the issues is like, for example, the election. We've also done things on COVID reentry, which is what we launched with in April. Right now, we are covering food insecurity at the neighborhood level in a downtown Toronto East End community called Riverside. So it kind of ranges in terms of the topics we tackle. But in a given month, this is what we always do. We have 4 outputs. In week 1, we publish an explainer that breaks down the systemic problem explored in the feature. Week 2, we have a long form feature that reports on local solutions that addresses the systemic problem. Week 3, we host an event that convenes community members, industry leaders, members of the public, and the reporter, as well as sources from the story to discuss solutions to the problem. So they're community driven. And then in week 4, we publish an article that crowdsources solutions from the event. So what ends up happening is that we reflect those solutions back to the community so then they can take action on those, on the problem on their own terms in a way that makes most sense to them. But not only that, the coverage informs our ongoing editorial coverage of that particular topic. So we're not just dropping the story and then just moving on to the next thing. So that also ensures that we're building ongoing relationships with the community that we're serving so they know we're invested in the long term. So this is just another example, continuing on from the election coverage that I showed you. The left-hand side is an explainer of the Toronto municipal election. This kind of showed people how to vote, where to vote, how to register to vote. The right-hand side, if you guys go to the greenline.to, you'll see kind of the format and how we tailor the site to this action journey model is the long form piece that we did that basically looked at the track records and the policy platforms of the electoral candidates. So this is the most important thing that I want to highlight in terms of metrics. So I mentioned at the end of the event, we basically, or during the event, we have a story circle or story sharing portion where folks share solutions to these systemic problems or a particular systemic problem that they're facing. This is a snapshot of the event that we held for the election. And these are folks sharing their solutions. And you can see in the background, it says, well, how would you increase youth voter turnout in Toronto? So among the top three solutions were election resources at the library and expand civic education. There was one more, but those were the top three that emerged. And then we kind of curated them and then reflected them on the website. What I want to highlight actually is the way we were able to curate this was through a survey that we conducted. It was a community survey that asked open-ended questions about how to basically address youth voter turnout or low youth voter turnout in the election. And so what there was about, I don't recall the exact percentage, but I can give you another percentage. For our COVID events, there was about 40 to 50% of the people who attended who actually completed the survey. And at that event, there was about 60 to 70 people who attended. So for me, the conversion rate of how many people completed the survey is pretty essential, because it's not a short survey, it's pretty in-depth, but people are quite inclined to fill it in because after a really robust conversation with other community members in a really nice space where there's a fun event happening, people are more inclined to actually follow through on the survey results. So those are pretty critical in terms of informing our ongoing coverage, but it really tells us that they're really engaged with our process and our action journey model. So that's the second metric that we look at in a lot of detail. I also realize there isn't a lot of time left, so I'm going to try to get through this really quickly. We've had a lot of the third metric that we look at is more qualitative, but I think given the sheer amount of feedback that we've been receiving, it could be turned into a quantitative measure. And this is just like the kind of feedback that we get. This was the feedback we got for our mayoral candidate kind of action journey. And you can see just the feedback is like, this is really useful. This is so practical. This is what I've needed. Like we were looking, somebody actually messaged me personally and said, like, I was talking to my friends about how we couldn't find something that just like gave us rundown of the major issues and the major players for candidates for the election. And you guys had this available. And Toronto is an oversaturated media market. So that was a very nice thing to hear. And then the other thing I want to share, and unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to share this entire video with you, but I really encourage you to take a look at it because it's a video of a woman who was the third top mayoral candidate in the city. And she is not a typical candidate. She's a young woman of color who's Black. She's a working class. She was somebody who experienced homelessness while working full time. And so the video, if you check it out, is really her just kind of speaking to that experience. And so I don't know, I'm not able to go to the next slide, you see, but yes, this is it. So this was the feedback that we received. This is just a sampling of it as a result of the video that showed this woman sharing her experience of being unhoused while also working full time. And it basically, as you can see, it just drew out so many people who said, I've never known of a politician that I could relate to. I'm going to be voting for the first time as a result of seeing this coverage. Obviously, this person is pretty incredible, and that's what motivated these folks to vote. But it obviously helped that the Green Line was the only place that actually covered her in earnest compared to other available outlets in Toronto. And so that really told us that we're making a clear impact, especially if it's like, it really is honoring this mission of encouraging people to take civic action as a result of reading and consuming our coverage. So this is the third kind of core kind of metric that we're starting to figure out and develop a methodology around. So that's it. Thank you so much, folks, for taking the time to listen.
That was terrific. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to, spotlight everyone's video. And we have a bunch of great questions in the Q&A. And one I wanted to start with was one actually that Lindsay, you addressed briefly in the chat, but thought it was good and something that we should all talk about together, is from Celine, and the question about how do you recommend getting buy-in across newsrooms to track impact. So how are you communicating this with news organizations you're working with, or if you're in a newsroom with colleagues in the newsroom to buy in and actually do this?
Yeah, such a great question. I think we heard really wonderful examples from Mariko and from Alec and from Anita also about how y'all are doing it in your newsrooms and in your organizations. But that I do think, always having a champion for the work, so someone who's really bought in and who's going to be responsible for seeing it through. And we can see in all three of your organizations, it's a different department, it's a different person. So there isn't one way, but making sure there is a person who is in charge and to see that through, I think is really important. Having leadership buy-in, and that's not just senior leadership, but that's anyone who's in management positions is really important. I think when you're coming up with the impact frameworks, having that process be as participatory as possible so that you have especially editorial staff that are contributing to what do we mean when we say impact? What do we mean when we say success? What is it that we're thinking about is really important. And then having it be built into workflows. And again, something we've seen in three different ways, but having it be an expectation that not only doing excellent work, but paying attention to what happens afterwards, whether it's for follow-up reporting, for awards applications, for communicating the value to stakeholders like funders. There are lots of reasons why this work is important, but just being really clear that that is in fact part of the workflow process. That's an expectation set across the organization, I think is really important.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Anyone else want to chime in on that one? Otherwise, there's a few specific questions about each of your presentations that we can get to as well.
If I could add something really quickly, just on a kind of a practical level, and I don't know if this is necessarily a way to get buy-in, but one year I experimented with when annual reviews were coming up for our reporters, kind of pulling all the impact that they were able to provide for us over the past 12 months, and just to have them kind of, or a gentle reminder as to how this might kind of really work in their favor, not only just for kind of like the fundraising purposes. So just a reminder of how, just so that it can boast about it and kind of share it on that check-in period.
Awesome. And I imagine the wins channel you talked about in Slack is a great way of doing that as well. And one of the questions we have is, aside from media amplification, what other kinds of impact does your staff share in that channel? And how are you thinking about that? And related, how are you thinking between the difference between quantitative and qualitative data and stats? And how do you balance both of those, I suppose?
Yeah. So to the first question, kind of what lives on our wins channel, I mean, that's anything and everything. Some of it doesn't actually, of course, make it into the impact tracker because there are things that they kind of hear in session or behind closed doors or something like that. And it's just maybe not appropriate even to share out. But yeah, media amplification is kind of one of the easiest because it's hard to kind of have eyes and ears everywhere. But testimonials, I think that's a really good place to kind of capture them. If a legislator, say, kind of refers to a story as part of a bill, kind of we can kind of begin to pay attention to that and see if there's any kind of very tangible impacts that come out of that might not reach a real public platform. Those are the kind of ones that really kind of come to mind at the moment. But in terms of qualitative and quantitative, we really see them going hand in hand. And so I'm just thinking back to the way that we report to our grant funders, for example. It always kind of starts off with just kind of the numbers and providing some context to the numbers. So for example, if someone is an environmental funder, how does these environmental stories measure up against some of our other reporting beats? And sometimes maybe that's not the best way, but at least gives them a little bit of context, because sometimes 100,000 views doesn't really mean anything to someone that sits outside of the news industry. But after that is where we really kind of get into the meat, where we'll call out individual stories and what that looks like out in the community, and where people have kind of taken our stories out in the field and kind of like ran with it. So as an example, again, we published a story about community gardens. We heard later that a local school kind of started up their own community garden. So small things like that.
I love that. That's amazing. And we are at time. So if folks need to drop off, that's fine. But I think if we can stick around for another couple minutes, that would be great. And Anita, there's a question for you, couple questions for you in the Q&A. First, question from Kim about how you're thinking about measuring impact. I know it's still, the Green Line still a relatively young organization and it's early days still, and you're thinking through these questions, but would be curious how you're starting to think to put some of those ideas in process that align with your action funnel.
Yeah, one thing I would say, so I want to highlight again, the metrics that I mentioned were the saves, the community survey responses and completion of those surveys, and then also just like measuring quantitatively just the media response and online responses to our journalism. But one thing that I often cite in terms of impact, and one thing that I'm proudest of and has actually helped basically build the Green Line up from the ground up, is our partnerships. So we actually have a multitude of partnerships at the grassroots level. And in a lot of way, because we serve underserved communities in Toronto, when you get the buy-in of certain grassroots organizations and they're working with me on a particular topic or action journey, and then I reference that to another funder and they're like, oh, I recognize the impact of the work that that organization's doing, it ends up being kind of like this really great domino effect. And because you end up getting buy-in as a result of the fact that you got buy-in from another trusted organization that is serving underserved communities in the city. So I actually also include the reach and amplification we get as a result of the fact that we get to tap into those partner networks. So that's another approach that we're taking in terms of measuring impact. It's not just the journalism pure and simple. It's not just like the number of people who attend our events or complete our surveys. It's really our networks, because that really does prove out to folks that, hey, like Anita is trusted by, or the Green Line's trusted by these entities, then we can probably get down with her too. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. It's more in a networked way, similar to what Alec was talking about.
Terrific. That sounds great. Sorry. And Alec, one of the questions that came in for you, which I saw you answered in the chat, was you highlighted all the different categories that that there are with that you're tracking at Solutions Journalism Network. And is there any that are particularly challenging, or how do you think about prioritizing and tracking all those different channels, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a great question. As far as prioritization goes, it's really hard to do. It's really like a function of what kind of information comes through the tracker. And what I do when I filter through and I vet the information is I tend to prioritize what do I think is the highest quality impact that we're seeing in the information, and then I try and work through those impact anecdotes first. But it's not like we're equipped at this point to be able to target any specific impact categories. But to answer David's question specifically, the one that we've had the hardest time gathering information for and be able to collect examples for really is accountability. And this will not be a surprise to any of you who are trying to reach a level where your journalism is impactful in that way, holding power to account. It's often really difficult to be able to prove that the journalism that you've produced is the vector for the change that you're seeing. People in power are often reluctant to admit that the journalists are the ones that have influenced their decision making. So that has been a challenge. However, as I was pointing out, I think what's really exciting about impact tracking is that it is very much doing solutions journalism on your own reporting. And what I mean by that is if you see your reporting as a means to affect change in an effective way, this is an opportunity to collect evidence of effectiveness around your journalism. And it's a fun exercise. And I think when it comes to accountability specifically, it does mean going to many more sources than perhaps other types of impact categories in order to dig out information about whether the reporting led to change. And what I will mean by that is if the leader of a local council might not acknowledge that your work has led to change, some local activists on the ground might be able to acknowledge your work and say that it helped them get informed about what could be done better, and put pressure on the powers that be to affect change. So those might be sources that one can turn to in order to verify that your work has led to accountability. So yeah, that would be my answer to that.
Terrific. Well, thank you, everyone. This was tremendous. I know we're over time, so thank you, everyone, for sticking around and really participating in a really wonderful conversation. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your insights and how you're approaching it. We'll be sure to share the recording and share the slides. So thank you for that. Thank you, everyone, for engaging with the chat.